Hello, good evening everyone. This is me, André Hedlund, here for a live because we're actually promoting our new course, Bilingualism, Language and Cognition, Rodolfo Machello and Ekaterina Matveva, and moi here. We're going to be teaching you about the brain, how the brain processes language, the connection between language and thought. We're going to talk about the critical period hypothesis, which I'm going to discuss today. Universal grammars, language alter ego, that's pretty cool. Anyway, welcome. I'm going to give you a preview of what we're going to be looking at during the course. If you want to know more about the course, you can visit my website, ebcrocks.com, or you can go to Machello Consultoria. Just Google it, you're going to find it, T-L-L, or you can go to amolingua.com, okay? And, okay, I'd like to start with a very brief introduction of how the brain actually processes language. So, where is language processed in the brain? And then I'm going to talk about what we know about the critical period hypothesis. Is there a window? Is there, a maximized, or how should I, enhanced period in which we should learn a second language or even a first language? And after that period, maybe we cannot learn any longer. So that's the idea of a critical period, right? Well, so let's start with some basic neuroanatomy. I'm not going to show you anything now because this is for the course. And Rodolfo has joined us. Thank you very much. We're going to have 2 more lives. We're going to have a live with Rodolfo. We're going to have a live with Kate. And they're going to talk about their thing. I don't even know what they're going to discuss, but I can tell you it's going to be super awesome, super interesting. Anyway, so where is language processed in the brain? Well, I'm going to use my brain to show you. I wish I had my brain replica, but I don't have it any longer. I'm actually trying to get one of those acrylic brains. So if you are, if you know where I can find one, I've been trying to find one, but I really need one that kind of looks like a real brain, a life-size brain, okay? Anyway, so this is my brain. I recently had a haircut. So this is my left hemisphere. This is my right hemisphere. According to Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa, about 70-75% of human brains process language mostly here, left temporal lobe. So that's in the left hemisphere, okay? Which means that some people actually process language mostly in the right hemisphere. But the idea here is, do we process all of language in that particular area of the brain? So we have 4 lobes, right? Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining. So this is the temporal lobe, and we have the left and the right temporal lobe. We have the frontal lobe, right? We have the parietal lobe, that is basically here, and we have the occipital lobe. That's the back of your head. So does that mean that language is exclusively processed in one of those, either the left or the right temporal lobe? Not really. We can talk about brain dominance. We can talk about split brain surgery. But to be very fair, a lot of language is actually processed on the other side. So we know, for example, that if you attempt to do a bootstrap test, so imagine you're looking at colors on a screen, and then you have the color. So you have an image showing the color, and then you have the name of the color. So you have it written down. You're going to use different sides of your brain. You're going to use the left side to read that information, and you're going to use the right side to look at the color, to see the color, right? So it depends on what aspect of the language we're talking about. For example, we know from fMRI or neuroimaging studies that intonation is mostly, processed in the right side or in the right hemisphere of the brain. So language is not exclusively processed in the left temporal lobe, but mostly, or nearby areas. And Rodolfo He's the expert. He can talk to you about, Broca's area, Wernicke's area. They're pretty much, near, either in the temporal lobe or near the temporal lobe. And they play a key role in speech production, for example, meaning formation, things like that. So what you need to know now is that most of human brains process language, most of language, reading and everything, in the left temporal lobe, okay? But not exclusively. So it changes, it varies, all right? Whenever we're looking at something and we need to read something, so there's a lot of activation in the occipital lobe as well. If we need to think of words, come up with words, write something, there's a lot of activation in our working memory system. So you're going to see some activation in the frontal lobes as well. So again, I don't want you to have an idea, the idea that everything happens in just one very specific area of the brain. Okay, that's what I want you to know for now. It happens everywhere. Our brain is always active. If you put someone inside the fMRI, the magnetic resonance imaging machine, you're going to see fireworks all over the brain. Okay. Now that we know a little bit about how the brain processes language, let's talk about the critical period, because there is something in neuroscience and in biology that we can call specialization or lateralization. So according to many authors, as we grow older from birth, we tend to lateralize or specialize different areas of the brain. That's why we have different lobes, and they're normally in charge of different things, right? Sometimes they're in charge of pretty much the same thing, but different mechanisms or processes of the same thing. So as we grow older, we tend to specialize or lateralize. Again, language is more lateralized to the left, so the temporal lobe is more specialized, more in charge of language, right? But again, it's not an absolute truth. Some parts of language are also processed in different areas, okay? So this is very basic neuroanatomy for you to get an idea of how language works in the brain. Now, let's talk about the critical period. So my question is, and you can interact with me, is there a language window of opportunity? And somebody is angry in traffic right now. So do we need to learn language, by a certain age? Otherwise, we will not be able to speak that language. And when I say language, now I'm referring to L1. So that's your first language. So let's imagine that you were born somewhere. I don't know, maybe you were born here in Brazil, but you were never really exposed to language. You were neglected as a kid. After a certain period, can you still learn language the same way that, typical people do? That's the question. Now transfer that to second language. I've learned L1. I'm proficient. I can speak L1. I can read and write in L1. After a certain period or a certain age, can I still learn a second language, or do I have to start early? So that's my question for you. As I'm going through the slides, I'm going to show you some slides. Try to answer those two questions, okay? I'd like to start from a quote by our good friend Albert Einstein. And he said, I'll give you 10 seconds to help me unscramble the letters. So only two things are infinite. The N virus, so the capitals here, they're actually a word, but I've scrambled the letters. So try to guess. The N virus and human tips. And I'm not sure about the former. Any idea what those words mean? I'll give you a couple of seconds. Okay, I have to carry on because it's going to take a little longer today. So only two things are infinite. The universe and human. Okay, Chris, you got it. Well done. And human tips. What's that? And I'm not sure about the former. Uh, Nobody? So the next one is inhuman stupidity, and I'm not sure about the former. Yeah, stupidity. Anyway, well, I got to tell you something. Einstein is considered one of the greatest geniuses of our time, and he said that only two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not sure about the former. I love to start with this quotation because I actually think that science makes progress. And, you know, I think you'll agree with me that what people used to believe a million years ago, we didn't even have the scientific method. We were not very knowledgeable about the world. But what people used to know, let's say 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, is very different from today, right? And if you think about the universe, according to most, I'd say, pretty much the whole scientific community, the astrophysicists, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Carl Sagan, those guys, the universe is not infinite. The universe is in expansion. And there was a singularity, the Big Bang. And so Einstein was wrong about the universe. He thought that the universe was infinite. But he said, I'm not sure about that, right? So that goes to show that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to not know things. And, as long as we go further and we try to figure out, that's okay. And we have to try to push science forward. And that's what I'm going to show you today. Because, there have been a lot of people discussing this idea of a critical period. So what is a critical period? I normally ask people to think about it for a couple of minutes. So what is the best definition for a critical period? Today, I'm not going to give you this time. I'm just going to show you what I got from the Oxford Living Dictionary. So according to this dictionary, critical means having a decisive or crucial importance in the success, failure, or existence of something. And I would like to highlight decisive or crucial and important success and failure, right? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples to make it more, to make it clearer. Don't know if you can see the whole sentence, but I'll just read it to you. The avoidance of injury is critical to a professional athlete, meaning that if the athlete gets injured, they will have to stop playing, to stop, their career, possibly. It is critical that we keep the content of the letter secret, because if somebody discovers the content of the letter, maybe a revolution will start, maybe someone will be assassinated, I don't know. So critical, fundamental, right? Finally, continued funding is critical for the project, which means that if you do not have funding for a long time, continuously, you will have to shut down the project, right? That's according to the Cambridge Dictionary. And we're talking about critical period. So what's the definition of period according to the Cambridge Dictionary? A fixed time during the life of a person or in history. And I would like to bring your attention to the words fixed time and history, right? Fixed time. And to illustrate, I'll give you a couple more examples. Most teenagers go through a rebellious period. Fixed time when they are still teenagers, adolescents, but after that, no more. It's fixed, but it has a beginning and an end, right? Her time at the university was the happiest period of her life. So now she might be 50, 60, or whatever, and she has never been as happy as when she was at the university, right? So that was a fixed period. Most of us go to university for what? 4 years. If you get if you go to a postgraduate course, maybe another 2 years or 4 years or something like that. Fixed period. There's beginning, there's an end. And finally, he was one of the most important writers of that period. So maybe that period was the early 1900s, maybe it was the 1920s or 30s or something like that, a decade or two. But after that period, somebody else took his place, right? Again, fixed time. It has a beginning and an end, right? And if you look at the timeline of research about the critical period, so let me turn the camera back to me now. So what is a critical period? It's a fundamental, paramount, very important, fixed time in which something must happen, according to basically all the dictionaries I've looked at, right? It is a fixed time, it's a period, that something needs to happen, because this fixed time is essential, it's fundamental, it's paramount, right? And there are a lot of people who actually have written about this. So if there is a critical period for language acquisition, that means that there is a fixed time in which we need to be exposed to language so that we can develop language. Otherwise, we will never fully acquire, or even not even acquire. That's the idea, right? And there are a lot of research. There are a lot of researchers that support this idea. So if you look at even Chomsky, he talks about universal grammar and the language acquisition device. So we must be born with some sort of internal mechanism that will help us acquire language through something that he calls poverty of stimulus, right? So we do not receive a lot of exposure, or we do not receive a lot of stimulation from our parents, because they use baby language with us. They only utter a couple of very simple basic structures, but we're able to fully form language after that. So it must mean that we have something within us, something genetic. So you can, and I think he was the one who said you can teach a gorilla as much as you want. They will never develop language as we have, right? Because they don't have this language acquisition device, but we do. And for that to be true, most languages, or according to him, all languages must have something in common. They must have the same categories of words, for example, like subjects, or nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. Otherwise, if we had very different structures for different languages, this language acquisition device wouldn't work, because we need to get the same framework from different cultures. If I was born here, or I don't know, in India, or in New Zealand, or in Papua New Guinea, or in South Africa, I have the same genetic mechanism, or the same internal mechanism to understand and acquire the languages from those places. So those languages, they need to have something in common. The structure needs to be common to them. That's universal grammar, in a very simple way, right? So if we look at the timeline for the researchers who support this idea, you're going to see that in 1959, two Canadian neuroscientists, Penfield and Roberts, they started probing people's brains to find the source of, epileptic attacks. And they discovered that the temporal lobe, the left temporal lobe, was the major player when we're talking about language, right? And then after those guys, we had Hubel and Wiesel, who did something terrible. They actually got little cats and sewed their eyes together, so to avoid, to stop them from getting exposed to light, so that they could then open their eyes and see if they would still develop eyesight, according, just like other cats. And they realized that after some time with their eyes shut, they could not fully develop sight or our vision, okay? Which means that there was a critical period for vision, for eyesight. And then this guy, Eric Lenneberg, in the 1960s, based on, previous works, Penfield and Roberts, Huber and Wiesel, and everything, he said, well, so there must be a period for us to acquire language. And he went back to Penfield and Roberts' work, and he set this period. So he actually popularized Penfield and Roberts' work to around 12 years, because that's puberty. That was puberty at the time that they were studying. So we are still developing our brain according to Penfield and Roberts until about 12, at least this part of the brain. So after 12, when we have reached puberty, that means that we cannot really change much in our temporal lobe, so it's consolidated. That means that the window has passed, basically, okay? And then if you look at Krashen, everybody knows Stephen Krashen, right? So in 1975, so he basically borrowed the theories of Lenneberg and Penfield and Roberts, who, by the way, let me turn back the camera because that's important, who, by the way, were talking about L1. They were talking about first language acquisition, so it's a big difference. And if you think about Hubel and Wiesel, they were talking about cat's eyesight. Big difference. So you cannot just import things from studies with different categories and different animals, you know. Anyway, and then we have Johnson and Newport in 1989. I don't think you can see the dates very well. And Flege in 2006, right? Those are some of the researchers that support the idea that we have a critical period. Again, a fixed period, a fixed time in our lives in which we need to be exposed to language. Otherwise, we will never fully develop. That's the critical period hypothesis, right? And, let me turn the camera back again. Different authors have proposed different critical period hypotheses. And, you know, Steven Pinker, you've heard of this guy, very famous linguist. He talks about, 5 or 6 years of age. And then you have and then he, of course, with a big study that came out last year, with Hartshorn, I think, Tenenbaum, Pinker, they were all involved. They got a huge sample. They moved the critical period, They always move the critical period deadline, right? So 5 or 6, and then maybe it's 12, and now it's around 17.4 years of age. So they keep moving anyway, and I'll tell you what I think about that. But anyway, so if you think about very interesting case studies from the literature. So we have Genie and Victor of Aveyron from France. So Genie was a neglected feral kid that was found in the United States. She was, her dad had psychological problems, he had speech problems, I think he was deaf or mute or something like that, or maybe both. And he could not, he was not completely deaf, he could hear her, but he hated sound. So he would shut her mouth all the time. He kept her closed in a bedroom, and I think she was abused. I'm not sure she was abused sexually, but psychologically, he probably attacked her, abused her physically, but in different ways anyway. So she was neglected. She was found by somebody at the community. The police came, and then they brought her to a very famous psychology at the time. I think her name was Curtis. And then she started studying this girl because she was around 12 years old. So she was the perfect case to check if the critical period was true, right? She had never been exposed to language. And they, Curtis tried to teach her language, tried to teach her what would be her first language, L1, which was English. Guess what? She never fully developed language. She had gross problems, structural problems. She couldn't put sentences together. She didn't know the difference between, she couldn't, order the words in a sentence. Like, she didn't know that the noun would normally came as a subject before the verb or something like that, or she would use a different verb. Anyway, her linguistic ability was really impaired. Now, We don't know if that was because she was severely abused and neglected as a kid, or if truly her temporal lobe got specialized doing something else, and then she lost the ability to learn languages, right? And the same thing happened with this guy, Victor of Aveyron. So this is a very famous case in the, I suppose, the 19th century. Is it? I think so. Anyway, so he was found in a forest by a hunter somewhere in France, and he had a lot of scars in his body. Like, nobody knows how he survived. It was a miracle at the time. And he was taken to a famous physician at the time called Itard, Louis Itard, I think, who called him a stupid idiot, that he would never be able to learn a language, and he never did. He was never able to learn language because, again, maybe he was too neglected, and or maybe it really specialized. It was so the temporal lobe was not flexible or plastic enough because he was older. He had reached puberty. It was not plastic enough for him to learn language. So he had formed a lot of grotesque habits, sort of imitating the animals that he grew up with. But, and I'm going to end here in the next couple of slides. So if you look at Montessori, and we can talk about Piaget as well. So Piaget was a big advocate for critical periods, right? If we take a look at Montessori and her contribution, we can actually talk about sensitive periods rather than critical periods. So if you look at the table that I'm showing you here, a sensitive period starts and ends gradually. So there's no deadline. It's more like, it's not like, oh my God, my son is going to be 12 tomorrow. If I don't enroll him in an English school, he will never learn English. It doesn't happen like that. It's more gradually, according to Montessori, I'm going to show you the professor from Harvard. I think his name, Jack Shonkoff, right? And a critical period ends abruptly, starts abruptly, ends abruptly. During the period of maximal sensitivity, heightened sensitivity to external stimuli that are compulsory, that's important, for the development of particular skill. After the period, the skill can still be learned, but less efficiently, still be learned. Here, the cortical areas allocated for the particular skill will adapt and perform a different function. So you can still learn here you cannot learn anymore. Examples. Language development has much more to do with sensitive periods rather than critical periods. Whereas visual capabilities, as we saw for the cats with Hubel and Wiesel, they have to do with critical periods. And again, if I'm going to show you a couple of things that I do in the course. So there's a video of this girl. She's a 4-year-old Russian girl, Bella. If you want to watch her, she's adorable. And she goes through 7 languages with, perfectly. You can tell that she has, she's fluent. I wouldn't say she's proficient, but she can, or maybe she rehearsed a lot to be on the show, but she goes perfectly through all those languages, right? And then I normally ask people, okay, we've all watched Bella. Are kids better language learners than adults? Guess what? Most people say, yes, they are. But then I asked them, how old were you when you started? And I did a social media poll to find out. So I got 510 respondents. And you can see that, most of them started, so the blue area here, most of them started when they were before 12 years old, which means that they were still within the critical period according to Lenneberg, right? But if you get together, if you add the between 12 and 18 and after 18, so you're going to get like almost 40, so 39.8, right? And then I asked the Brelters, if you're not part of Brelt, please become part of Brelt. And you see that 51 said that they started before 12, and then of course we have 49 who said that they started after 12, between 12 and 18 and after 18, which means that 43.9% of those people started after 12. So they started after the so-called critical period. And that should be very weird, because if you cannot acquire L2 after the critical period, according to a lot of researchers, how the hell did you end up becoming a teacher of English? Because all the people I surveyed were English teachers. So I assume they must be proficient, right? If they're teaching English. I could be wrong, of course. Some of them might have a lower level, but anyway, they were still able to reach, let's say, a B2 level, or maybe a C1 or C2 level. So the question is, critical period? Well, and then I'm going to end with this. If I have seen further than others, it's by Dingnast upon the SOS hurdle of giants. I'll give you 10 seconds to try to figure out this one. Okay, so it's standing upon the shoulders of giants. And, that was our friend Isaac Newton, who, by the way, probably didn't have an apple fall on his head. That's probably just a legend. Anyway, and what does that mean? It means that there are other people doing very interesting research, equally great research, that we have to look at before we decide if there is a critical period or not. So according to the others, so who are the others? Well, first of all, this guy, Benny the Irish Polyglot, I came across his video a couple of years ago, and here he goes through 8 languages, and he started learning when he was 21 years old. So when you look at Bella, you have the impression, of course kids are better. Look at Bella, she can speak 7 languages. Well, look at Benny. He can speak now more than 10 languages, probably 20 languages, and he started when he was 21. So, so much for the critical period here, right? And then if you go, and then he did this TEDx video, and he says that there was research from the University of Haifa in Israel that actually showed that adults can be better language learners than kids. They can starting from scratch. And then he said the University of Haifa. So here is, I'll show you, the University of Haifa in Israel. And that's the paper. I found the paper. And then the paper says, no childhood advantage in the acquisition of skill in using an artificial language rule. Artificial language rule because they created the language in a laboratory to make sure that the participants would not have contact with the language outside the lab. The laboratory was the classroom, right? But it was a language based on their language, Hebrew, but it was not a real language, right? And who wrote this paper? His name is right here, Avi Carney. And guess what? I met this guy in Israel. So I actually interviewed this guy at the University of Haifa. He bought me some coffee, so I liked him very much. And he explained to me that kids might be better acquiring procedural skills, or let's say speaking, phonology, accent, and stuff like that, whereas adults might be better acquiring declarative memory skills like vocabulary, and even grammar might be, kids might be more intuitive acquiring grammar, but adults, they have a huge repertoire, prior knowledge, so they might be better. So again, we are pretty much the same. What matters, and this is the key, the conditions, right? And then he told me, think about the conditions in which kids learn a language and the conditions in which adults learn a language. Big difference. Adults, they need, the truth is, adults, they normally start the course and they end the course, go back, start and end. There's no end to it, right? Whereas kids, they kind of have no option because they have to go through the whole course because their parents are pushing them. Yes, but of course, kids, they do have more neuroplasticity, so their brains are more flexible to learn. Yes. But is it enough to say that they're much better language learners than us? Or even worse, is it enough to say that if you do not learn L2, language 2, until you are 12, you will never learn? I don't think it is. To be honest, we have a lot of research showing that it isn't. And if you go, I was going to read to you, but that's for our course. But if you take a look at the timeline of people who support the idea that there isn't a critical period, there is a sensitive period that we can still learn at any age, you will see in the 60s, Escher and Price, you're going to see Snow and Höfenagel, Höll. You're going to see Wahlberg, Haase and Rascher. You're going to see Walsh and Diller. You're going to see Bonhertz. Very interesting Dutch study, by the way. And you're going to see Furman and Carney, Avi Carney. So you're going to see a lot of people supporting the idea that, you know what? You can learn a language at any age. I believe that. I believe that the limitations that we go through are normally more sociological, social phenomena, okay? Which means that for whatever reason we stop prioritizing learning a language, or we just don't have the time to go through the whole course. If you take a kid who's 6 years old or 7 years old and you enroll them somewhere, a school in your neighborhood, that works with the Common European Framework, for example, and you get a 39-year-old adult and you enroll them in the same school, and they have a course for kids and they have a course for adults, and then you follow them for 6 years. The question is, who's going to get to the CPE level first? Okay, so even though kids might learn faster, they still do not have all the cognitive resources to be able to take a CPE, because you know what, a CPE is a very complicated exam that requires a lot of linguistic repertoire, and adults, they have that better than kids. So I think that we have to be very careful when we're talking about the critical period hypothesis, because you can always learn a language. You just have to take the time, and you have to go through the process. You have to start and you have to end the process. You cannot stop and go back, which means that whenever you are advertising, if you work with kids, that it's better to start when you're young, you're not completely wrong. It is better because you know what? Those kids are probably going to finish their course. But you can also tell your adult students that the research shows that you can also learn, and you can learn better than kids given the right circumstances. And the right circumstances, just go through the process, start a course, go through the end of the course. I used to work at Cultura Inglesa in São Paulo. If you start B1, B2, basic 1, basic 2, pre-intermediate 1, pre-intermediate 2, intermediate 1, intermediate 2, upper intermediate 1 and 2, FCE, the MEC courses and the CPE courses, if you go through all of them, I can guarantee that if you are being promoted, you are becoming proficient in the language and you can do the CPE, and it doesn't matter if you started when you were 8 or if you started when you were 42. And to give you some hope, there is a woman called Mary Hobson from the UK who started learning Russian when she was 56. Today she's 90 something. She has become one of the greatest experts of Russian. She has a PhD in Russian literature and translation. She's one of the biggest interpreters of Alexander Pushkin's poems. She was awarded by the Russian government. They actually gave her a seal telling her, you are the greatest expert of Alexander Pushkin's poems in the world. She's British. She started learning Russian when she was 56. That's rare. But you know what she did? She started and finished the course. It's not so much about your brain. It's about your grit. It's about your growth mindset, your determination, whatever you want to call it, okay? So that's it. This is one of the live sessions of our bilingualism course, okay? I hope you enjoyed this one. It's going to be live for 24 hours. I'm going to upload it to my IGTV. And the good news is that Rodolfo Maciello and Ekaterina Matveva are going to do the same, okay? So they're going to go live with you. I don't remember the dates, but we're going to post something on Instagram very soon. And you can, get a little taste of our new course. This is what we're going to teach you, folks. We're going to teach you about... thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to teach you about how language is processed in the brain, how you can change your personality when you learn a different language, the types of grammar there are. I'm going to talk about the, sign language and how that is processed in the brain also. Pirahan language. This guy, Dan Everett, and he challenged Chomsky with the universal grammar concept. Everything. So keep tuned. Go to my website, EDC Rocks, and let me know what you think. You can actually read the critical analysis of the critical period or something like I don't remember. Just go to my website, edcrocks.com, and you search for critical. Just search for critical, and you'll see the research that I did at the University of Bristol about the critical period. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, wonderful holiday, right? Tomorrow is a holiday, and I hope you get interested in our course, bilingualism course, language and cognition with me, moi, Rodolfo Maciello, Rudy Maciello, and Kate Matveva. Thank you very much. Have a lovely night. Bye. See you.